Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lee Rose with Banking Transformed Webinars. We'd like to thank our listeners for joining us for our webinar from Amperity titled How to Use Customer Data to Deliver Better Customer Experiences. Before we begin, just a couple of quick reminders. First, the webinar will be recorded and emailed to you shortly after we've wrapped up. And also we will be doing a live Q&A toward the end, so please use that questions panel on your GoToWebinar dashboard to participate in the Q&A. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Christian Safici, Partner Solution Consultant at Amperity, and Vipul Vyas, SVP Vertical Strategy at Persato, and Jim Maroos, co-publisher of the financial brand and owner of the Digital Banking Report. Jim, you can go ahead and get things started, please.
Thanks very much, Lee. You know, we're starting off a new year, and I think the thing that we have to realize is that it kind of feels like last year. On the other hand, we're in a completely different environment in 2022, an environment that's going to be defined by how fast organizations can digitally transform themselves to meet the needs of the marketplace. You know, we're starting to see the financial results come out for all financial institutions, and the financial results look tremendous. I mean, it's a banner year that we had last year, but I think some of that masks the concerns that the marketplace should have around how well are they doing in meeting the needs of the marketplace and addressing the competitive environment that is getting more and more active. You know, when we look at the fintechs and big techs, we realize that the advantage that they hold at this time is their ability to use technology, data, and analytics to deliver a better customer experience. There's never been a more important time to deliver experiences based on the information we know about the customer. The customer wants us to know them, understand them, and reward them. And by rewarding them, I'm not talking about points. What I'm really talking about is rewarding them with the insights and capabilities to build a better financial future. You know, earlier today, I had a conversation with Jennifer Tescher from the Financial Health Network, and we talked about the fact that overall financial wellness across the marketplace has increased a little bit since the pandemic, but a lot of that was caused by government intervention, behavioral changes, and once-in-a-lifetime opportunities where funding was provided to make people feel more comfortable. A lot of that has gone away. So now the consumers can be looking to their financial institutions saying, what have you done for me lately? Do you have my best interest in mind? Or are you simply looking to cut costs and change the way you're doing banking to make your shareholders more money? So how do we do that? Number one, more important than ever before, we need to use data and analytics to build engagement beyond the experience. What I mean by that is, it's one thing to do things well, it's another thing to do the good things to help the consumer with their financial goals. They expect us to be like Netflix, where Netflix can pick the movie you want to watch next. The consumer wants us to determine what they should do next to make a better financial future. The only way we can do that is to use data and analytics at our disposal to build better experiences and to help the consumer down their customer journey. Now, what's interesting about that is we already use data to build tremendous reports. We know about our customer base. We know what they're doing. We know where they're going. The challenge is the consumer doesn't know that we know them. The consumer doesn't think, in most cases, that we have their best interest in mind. So really what it gets down to is, how do we deploy the insights we have at our disposal to make better experiences, to make greater engagement? I want my financial institution on a daily basis to be thinking on my behalf and helping me to meet my financial goals without me having to do all the heavy lifting. I don't want budgeting tools. I want a financial institution that will proactively help me and guide me toward the next best service, towards the next best communication, providing me ideas that I can implement, or even better, implementing those ideas proactively on my behalf, given where I want to be going forward. We're talking about embedded financial institutions. We're talking like bank of a service. We're talking about embedded financial services. And in some cases, we're talking about the financial super app that will take both inside insights as well as outside insights to build a better financial relationship as a win-win. More than ever, we need to use customer data platforms, CRM systems, advanced technology around marketing of services and communication, and content to build better relationships. We do really well use machine learning and AI to avoid risks and to avoid fraud. We now, more than ever, have to do better at building relationships. The research done by the Digital Bank Report found that organizations right now are as overwhelmed as they've ever been with the type of data they have and the different silos it's resting in. They're really challenged by, how do you take this data and make it actually usable? How do you deploy it across the organization so you can build better services, build better relationships, build a personalization that goes beyond simply call me by name? 2 days ago, I got a message from my financial institution because in my hometown, we had quite a bit of snow and a lot of branches were closed. They reached out to me and said, by the way, if you have to reach your branch, here's how you can do it. You can use mobile banking. If you haven't signed up, sign up today. You can use automatic deposit transfer, mobile deposit transfer. If you haven't signed up, do this. In addition, you can connect with other brands via the phone or via a video call. What's interesting is I already do all those things. Why are you telling me what I could do when it doesn't take much to know what I already am doing? We need a centralized repository for data and for the ideas we want to share with the customers. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. How can we use data to build better experiences, to build higher levels of engagement? This will keep our loyalty and trust intact and will make it so that our consumers, our customers, do not go outside looking for services that we could provide. So let's start, Vipul, let's talk a little bit about what does your organization do and how do you help organizations use data for better experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think simply put, what we do is help enterprises influence behavior and understand what influences behavior. And so specifically what we do is work on optimizing through machine learning and artificial intelligence language. So, as an example, in the non-banking space, we may say, hey, we think it's a good idea for you to get a flu shot or, vaccinated. And there are millions of different ways you can say that same sentence. And what we've done is deconstructed human language into a multivariable equation with multiple components and gained an understanding of what elements influence behavior to what degree. Is it urgency? Is it safety? Is it attention? Is it some other motivating emotion? And what phrases and ways of saying those, conveying those emotions or evoking those emotions work best. And so you can take a simple sentence like, hey, go get your flu shot, and say that a million different ways. And we've understood what those permutations are and what's the optimal way to say that, which could also be applied to, is this a great time to try our mobile banking application if you've not tried it before, right? It's the same idea. And as I mentioned, we do two things. One is understand what the right way of communicating would be to invoke or influence behavior, and then also at the same time perceive, because we do testing to fuel that AI engine to say, well, there's a million ways to say it, let's try a few of them and see what resonates. And by doing that, we also get an understanding of what is resonating in terms of language and emotions that the language invokes with different demographics. And so we can get a perception of well, with the Gen X folks, it's going to be this type of emotional portfolio that drives the most behavioral change. And for Gen Z, and maybe it's Gen Z men specifically, it's this type of emotional portfolio that invokes the behavior we're looking for. So not in a nutshell, in a fairly expanded way, that's essentially what Persato as an organization really focuses on.
So Christian, what does Imperity do to provide the tools so that Persato can communicate in the way he was just describing?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So Imperity is a leading CDP in this space, and we focus on taking all the data that drives those decisions, those models, those answers to those questions, and makes it usable, right? At our core, we believe that the bigger the company, the more data, the messier that data is, and they need the tools and services to get to the bottom of what a customer's up to, right? To really surface the signals about a customer's behavior so that we can then activate. And that's how we integrate with all of our partners, is we build that view of the customer by looking at all that messy data, making sense of it, identifying who Christian is, who Jim is across all of those different siloed systems, and then applying a one key to that individual. So now we can start to monitor Jim's behavior as he's engaging, as he's activating, so we can help make that next best action, that next best decision, whether it's through modeling, whether it's just through standard marketing, whether it's through customer service integrations, right? So if you pick up the phone and call, we're able to surface those platforms with the right information about what your last activity was, more importantly, how valuable you as a customer are to the brand, and help make those next action decisions.
So Christian, how has the pandemic impacted the need for leveraging data and customer insights in banking from your perspective? What has changed since the pandemic happened? Has it been simply the awareness of what can be done by the consumer as they've been hunkered down and working with a lot of digital apps, or what has really changed in the way that organizations are looking at using data and insights?
Yeah, it's a great question. And ironically enough, I was actually at a financial institution at the start of the pandemic. So I'm now seeing this from both sides out. There's a lot that we can learn from the pandemic, but most importantly, from a data perspective, it's really teaching us that with the right data set, we can pivot at a moment's notice to really deliver what our customers need. And on all those things you said in your intro are so true. But you can't get there if you can't pivot, and you can't pivot if you don't know what the customer's up to or what their needs are. Specifically, you talk about it was a hard time for so many different people, but to have the data sets at your disposal to understand who's on the brink of financial insolvency now that maybe they're home or they're out of work, whatever the situation may be, with the right data set, right understanding of your customer, right understanding of their behaviors, you can then prioritize their experiences and help them get, during the pandemic, help them get to the support that they needed to kind of, make the right next step as they endure their hardships or just get through day to day. And you touched on another one with regards to the weather, but another big one was store closures, right? If I rely on cash, if I rely on going to the bank every Friday to get cash, well, I can't go to the bank now. So let's understand what those customer behaviors are. Let's market and message to them, and then to be able to provide services around that. You need a new debit card. This is how you use a debit card. This is how you use mobile banking. But it's all around, you said it so eloquently, it's all around understanding what the customer is doing and then acting on their best behalf.
So having a good customer data platform really helped organizations determine who would be most eligible and most in need of PPP loans. But even in a deeper sense, when people are given the forbearance on mortgage payments, a good CDP would help organizations understand, is this person not making their mortgage payment because they're trying to take this money and put it into savings? In other words, they could have made their mortgage payment, but given that they don't need to, it's not going to impact them negatively. It's good to have a bigger saving plan versus those people that really was a difference between completely losing their house and being able to keep it. I mean, this is really the foundation upon which why you need this deeper understanding of data and the way the consumer's behaving, correct?
Absolutely. All right. Again, it's about being able to model the data to understand what the I don't want to say the intent, but what that next action or the behavior is of the customer. So you can look at, the trend of understanding deposits and understanding that, hey, my deposits aren't changing over time. So the likelihood of him or a family needing a PPP loan might be smaller than somebody whose deposits dried up over the period of time. Now, that does then go into this, one of the things we'll probably get to later, but this situation that maybe we know too much about my behavior. And I think it's also a fine line that we need to be cognizant of when we get into the messaging, when we engage with our customers, and we use that data on their behalf.
So, Vipul, from your perspective, there's no disputing the fact that financial institutions have access to more data than almost any other industry. But that said, how should brands make use of this data in ways that maybe they haven't thought about that? How do you work from the difference between becoming insightful and becoming creepy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's meeting the customer where they are. So if you're providing value in the dialogue, I don't think it's going to be perceived in a creepy form. So let me give a specific example. I think based on what Christian said is that you're really trying to, and I think you alluded to this as well, Jim, is you're trying to find that next best action. So what is the right next thing for Vipul to do? And it's the agenda both of the enterprise, the financial services organization, and Vipul and me. And so it's the Venn diagram intersection of where those two things collide. And so as part of that, it's also what channel is most appropriate. And given this CDP and what Imperity can glean from an insights perspective, I can say the best place to meet Vipul with this useful thing I have to tell him is by SMS versus by email, because he doesn't ever respond there. And so I'm going to meet him with a product that is pertinent to him, that will make his world life and life better. And I'm going to meet him in a place that is relevant to him. And that he seems to respond to. And I'm going to invite him or communicate that offer to him or that message to him in a way that resonates with him. That's where the language piece comes together. And so you're basically meeting me where I am with language and emotional resonance that works for me. And I think that is not so creepy as much as it's just useful and valuable. And I think, one of the things you mentioned before was around financial wellness and health. I think a lot of what we're doing is diagnosing what's happening, if we're going to use a medical analogy for a moment, what's happening with someone's financial health and well-being, and prescribing them in a way the things that are pertinent or useful to them. So I don't think it's creepy if your doctor has some sense of what your blood sugar levels are or your blood pressure and intervenes in an appropriate way. So that's my perspective on it, which may be a little bit different than others.
So, from your perspective, then it really is about a value transfer. I'm not going to mind if you know more about me if you deploy it in a way that's actually helping me. I use the example, and it's quite a ways back now, but when Disney first started using the wristbands and to identify as you're going through the park, and they used it to track people, but they also used it for talking characters to communicate with children. So initially, one of the first drawbacks would be, oh my gosh, this is creepy that the character is talking to my child by name. And then all of a sudden you look at your child's face and you see the look on their face, you go, oh, there's nothing better in the world than the fact that they knew the child's name. And it's those type of things. It's also, as you said, it's not just what you talk to them about, but what channels you use and how you talk to them, how the consumer wants to be talked to. I mean, it's not, what's interesting is no longer determined by demographics. We have a situation now that demographics don't determine how a person uses financial services. How does your organization divide this up? How do you use the data, both internal and external data, to build a more complete profile of a consumer so that you can enhance the experience and, most importantly, build greater engagement?
It's great, and I think, from Christian's perspective, the CDP is going to obviously be much richer in terms of the types of data that it captures. But from a Persato perspective, we want to understand what resonates in terms of the actual communicated language, and that is communication in terms of words, formatting, imagery. What is it? Because we're emotional creatures, even though we like to think of ourselves as making intellectually driven decisions, a lot of the decisions we make are made back here in that, reptilian brain of ours. And so there often I say that we do what this brain tells us and justify it with what the prefrontal cortex tells us, but the intellectual part of ourselves. And so I think what we are trying to understand is there's some underlying driver, whether in one person's case is just not feeling insecure anymore about their financial state. For another, it may be an aspirational state of I'm secure, but I want to be in a better place because I have hopes and dreams I want to achieve. And so for each person, it's understanding where are they, where are they in their life, what emotions resonate based on that, and then communicating and meeting them there with the right words and language so that we actually influence their behavior. The last kind of comment I would make in this regard is that, in healthcare, oftentimes, as just using that analogy, probably a little bit too much, but doctors may know that someone has high blood pressure, some other issue, but they're not taking action. And it's because they haven't found the thing that resonates with them, the underlying why. And I think it's useful from a financial services perspective to latch on to go, okay, this person, they just want to feel safety and security in their financial well-being. For this other person, it's some other driver. And that is what I need to understand in order to be able to influence their behavior in a valuable way.
So, Christian, from your perspective, I mean, we're talking about the use of massive amounts of data, and I liken it to a core systems transformation where you go, it is so big, people sometimes stall simply because it's such a big initiative. How does an organization divide up this opportunity? I'm sure that not every organization you work with says, okay, we want to do it all today. But a lot of organizations that we know hesitate to move forward because they say, it's almost like cleaning the house before the cleaning person comes, that you go, I want to make sure that what you get is really clean, when in fact, that's part of what you do. How do organizations divide up this huge initiative in ways that they can actually see progress today?
Yeah, that's a great question because, again, in the financial services industry, my experience has been they want to move the rock just once. And so they'll have no problem with a 12, 18, 24-month project so that at the end they could say, I moved the rock. You're absolutely right. It's about what can I do within shorter chunks of time to make progress. At Imperity, we always talk about time to value, right? What are the things that I can do to provide value right away so that you can start engaging with your customers differently than you were today? So how do you break that down? I'd want to look at what are your drivers for some of your pain points, right? How can we, store closures in weather, for, to the point you brought up earlier. If that's a pain point, how do we solve that right away? We look across our data sets, all these siloed systems with terabytes of data in them. What are the systems that focus on driving some type of change, and start there? Again, you want to find the ways to add value to the customer's experience as quickly as possible, and then continue to onboard the rest of the systems that make sense. You have to be able to find small problems and solve them, in short periods of time, and then build on that momentum. Because the minute you can show value, the minute you can show progress, the minute you can show something to the folks writing the checks at the end of the day that, hey, this is working and this has momentum, that's going to help you continue on. Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to pick the wrong lane first and then not be able to, at the end of 6 months or 3 months, not have anything to show for it. And you say, yep, I got X done, but X isn't adding any value. So you want to be able to drive you want to be able to do something that drives value and then build on that momentum. And it could be anything, whatever's important. You can look at, maybe there's an immediate need to drive checking engagement, to stop checking account churn, right? So again, use some of those behavior or some of those immediate needs to drive behavioral change.
So can you give me some examples of what you've seen organizations do, not in the biggest, broadest sense, but in the narrower sense, saying maybe in the loan area, in the credit card area, in the checking account area? Can you give me some examples of how organizations have used the CDP to really drive results? That is, as you said, almost an iterative change that I can say, I'm not looking for that 2022 win. I'm looking for the wins in February and March.
Yeah. So again, from my experience at the financial services firm, we actually were having a problem with checking account opens and then never being used, right? So then there was this expectation that at some point they're going to close. So what we ended up looking at was, how does the surrounding data sets drive an understanding of the behavior, so we can predict within a certain period of time, is this person going to close their account? Because they're not doing anything in the stack, right? They're not putting money in savings. They're not engaging with the wealth department. They're not engaging with a HELOC. So then we used all that data together to collectively build a model that says, within, I forget the specifics, but within X period of time, Christian's going to close this checking account. So what do? We figure out how to engage him beforehand, how to entice him to make direct deposits. Maybe I didn't know how to make direct deposits from a content perspective, right? So engage him to draw him in to use the account so that he doesn't close, because we knew if he doesn't close, then he has a lifetime value of X.
So Vipul, what's interesting, this is also a communication challenge. Let's say we have a customer that opens an account and doesn't use it. Or let's say we have a customer that started to open a product digitally and abandoned the shopping cart. What are some of the examples that you have communication-wise on how we can build this going forward?
Yeah, well, and I'll actually refer also to your previous question a little bit too, is that in the sense that in terms of getting started, the best advice I can give is to understand that it's a maturation process. It's taking on a level of sophistication that you don't have in some cases right now, and that's okay. And understanding that, you don't just sort of grow up overnight. And as a result, picking some small things as potential wins, and also mapping out what that journey might look like over 1, 2, and 3 years is not a bad idea. And often the case for anything that's data driven, that's AI or machine learning oriented, the rocket fuel for any type of system of that nature is data. And so you will go through a data acquisition phase where that data, until it reaches a critical mass, may not be terribly actionable. And understanding that and accepting that is also an important part of the journey. But getting back to your question, Jim, in terms of sort of abandoned shopping cart states, this is something that we have worked with quite extensively, both in financial services and in retail. So oftentimes it's a matter of, how do you follow up with the person, that with that stuck shopping cart state, what email messaging, what sometimes SMS messaging is the right communication to get them back into the shopping process. And sometimes it's a matter of changing just 1 or 2 words in the subject line of an email that gets them back and finishes the shopping experience versus them never coming back. And that we can say, when it comes to selling jeans, handbags, or finishing a credit card application. And the importance of the landing page that you bring them back to and the message that you use to draw them in is critical. And sometimes we see lifts of over 100%, sometimes 200% above the original control messaging when trying to accomplish that.
So, we'd love to think this is all a push and go, that it all happens automatically. But when you have a situation where you're using multiple channels, a lot of the power that we forget about is the deployment of decisions to people throughout the organization to help them make better decisions as far as product management, product development, and even communication with consumers after they've opened an account. Let's say we use branch employees for onboarding brand new customers. How do you help guide the communication that's done on a human basis to mirror what's being done through other channels so that it really becomes a consistent process of communication as opposed to I'm saying one thing one place, I'm saying another thing another way?
And you have to reflect both your brand voice and your intent at all those points. So one of the things we do is, for example, related to the in-store point of sale experiences, also do things in the call center. So call center scripting is also very valuable because you want your agent to show up based on that script as your best agent on their best day. And so that script sort of embodies that ideally, the ideal communication. And so that's one place where you can use that scripting to go between human and digital experiences relatively seamlessly. And then I'd say organizationally, we almost have to look at the journey as the product. Oftentimes we will organize ourselves based on channel. So we have someone who does email marketing, someone does SMS marketing, someone who does social media marketing, and that has some inherent value in that this is how, there's some expertise that needs to be cultivated for each of those channels. But at this point, those folks probably are going to be subject matter experts, but someone ultimately has to own the journey. And as you said, there are multiple decision points and forks and changes that will go from one thing to another. And so someone who owns the journey is going to be critical.
So, Christian, in the legacy banking world, we'd have the owners of the data, and they'd be in a small department, and they're building great reports. They're telling you what happened with programs post-program implementation, all that. How does the CDP, how does the customer data platform actually help empower departments? How have you seen organizations really distribute the access to data as it's democratized throughout the organization?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that by answering another question too that you answered a second ago, right? The idea that I abandon a shopping cart and then now we need to action that individual, like, hey, what happened to you? Well, what if you showed up in a call center, right? What action should we engage with you as somebody we know spent 30 minutes trying to fill out a HELOC loan and now all of a sudden showed up in a phone queue, right? Shouldn't we know that, right? We can integrate all these systems. We should treat you differently, right? We should give you to a tier 2 support. You already had some level of a problem. Why make you start at the bottom, right? So we should be looking at how data can drive those customer service experiences so we can increase the customer's experience and close those loans and to be able to engage those customers with the products. Now, to answer your question, I think that also answers your question in a bit, right? To be able to spread the data out, right? Not leave the data in a silo. So go back to my example. If we didn't have customer service hooked into the web and we weren't doing whatever, all of a sudden you'd show that, hey, Christian called the 800 number and he signed up for a HELOC loan. Great, way to go, Christian. But we're disconnected from the fact that he could have done it online or he tried to do it online and now he actually started with a negative experience. And so we're ignoring that from reporting, from an understanding of customer and customer behavior. So I may have, I dare go down this path, right? We hear a lot of times that banking is a commodity, right? And so if we don't understand and look at all of the things that affect a customer, then we're kind of propagating that idea, right? That it's just a commodity and I'm going to call the 800 number and I'm going to get a loan just simply because I need it and you answered the phone, rather than trying to give an experience that it delights and entices the consumer to continue the next HELOC or the next mortgage loan or the next checking account for the kids, whatever it may be. And so by keeping data in silos, we're not allowing for those future experiences, and we're kind of giving into this idea that it's just a commodity.
So sticking with you, Christian, everything you're saying here, the consolidation of data, the cleansing of data, the perfecting of data, the ability to distribute the data and insights, all's like apple pie. It's all really good. But I would imagine that your organization, when you're going out and selling to financial institutions, not every organization signs on the dotted line the first call. So what stands in the way of implementation? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people on the webinar today that say, geez, this sounds great. I'd love to have it. This is perfect. But they've had maybe another organization in, and for whatever reason, they don't move forward. What stands in the way of moving forward with a customer data platform such as what you can provide?
Yeah, I think it boils down to this, right? Over the years and the decades, financial institutions have hardened themselves against risk, right? They've put in place all these different controls. They put in processes to address regulatory requirements, and they've essentially built silos around themselves to avoid exposure to risk. And that, I think, is our biggest challenge when we talk about, well, I need data from all your systems in order to make this work. Right? I need data from credit and checking and loan and across the gamut. If there's a point solution, just give me the data and then we'll work with it. But now all of a sudden we have risk and regulatory folks who are now super concerned. They need to get involved to make sure exposure is limited. I think it also goes back to one of your first questions, right? Doing something small to show a value so you can build on that. I think it works here too, because it's that level of risk exposure, the idea to minimize risk exposure that's kind of stopping some of these behaviors. To keep the data in my silo, I can secure it myself. I'm good because I'm comfortable. But if you can find those small projects, the small wins that say, hey, we can do this and we can keep building on this, you can start to break down those silos. You can start to instill the level of trust that's needed, and you can continue to address the regulatory and the risk concerns one step at a time, again, rather than trying to push the big rock all at once.
That is so key, because I think you're right. Financial institutions are so risk-based, and it's the avoidance of risk. It's not the management of risk, which I often talk about in my podcast and on webinars I do that say, you know what, financial institutions have to start looking at how can they manage as opposed to eliminate risk. Phil, from your perspective, I would imagine this gets in your way of communication. That I think about my business bank that watered down communication so many different ways, that I was a banker by trade and I know what happened here. By the time I got through all the approval processes, they said, well, yeah, but we may be wrong. This person may not already have this. So they make it so that it covers everybody. And in a sense, it makes it so it covers nobody. The reality is we don't think about the fact that the risk of making the wrong communication may be a lot less than having 80% getting the exact right communication. Yeah, you may be off a little bit, but the person's not going to close the account. They understand the imperfection of the data. Does this get in the way as far as the way you communicate with consumers, or does this get in the way in your partnership with financial institutions as to, please, let us talk to the consumer the way we know them. Yes, we may not be perfect, but the risk isn't that great.
Well, it's exactly how you described it. There's a risk-reward equation in terms of the marketing side represents the reward and the legal and compliance side represents the risk. And it's a matter of, accommodating the interests of all those parties. Fortunately, I think we've seen as a trend is that most financial services institutions are at least loosening to some degree that equation in terms of letting some of that reward take place. And a part of that is seeing the results. So, in 96% of cases, we see at least a 50%, roughly 50% lift in performance relative to what they were going to go with originally. And so that dramatic difference in performance will let you kind of say, I'll, choke back on the risk a little bit, at least, dial down the risk aversion, because I'm seeing the reward and I'm not seeing the theorized risk either. So I'm getting more upside than any perceived, blowback on the downside. So to answer your question, I think that this is an issue. There's a natural tension between different parts of the organization, especially as you go through the approval process. But what you see is through empirical results, some of that soften. And that's the best way to do it. Show me.
So you really don't need perfect data then, do you? I mean, yes, it's because there is no such thing. I mean, you get close. But I think, we talked about on a pre-call, perfection is really the the challenge, because if you go for perfection, you're never going to reach it. And your counterbalance is speed.
Well, worse,
You're not there on
you're never
speed.
going to learn.
Right.
Sorry. If you wait for perfect information, one, you'll never have it, and then you're never going to learn, and you're never going to. The only process by which to aspire to or even approach perfection is to go through imperfection first, and you'll go from ugly to bad to good as a process, and you have to be okay with and prepared for the ugly, because you'll be working with every moment of I hate to call it failure, but less than optimal performance is in itself a key input to doing it better next time. And that is the spirit with which you have to approach this.
So, Christian, can an organization of any size benefit from and partner with your firm around a CDP?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because of our approach to the problem. We don't have a one size fits all approach. So if you're not enterprise, sorry. We actually are configurable from the perspective of, I'll also say this way. The idea that a lot of organizations spend a lot of money in their tech stacks, whether it's MarTech stack or just general tech stack. And the idea that I can walk in the door and have them scrap half of that just for my platform is silly. So we've actually designed an approach to solving the problem that takes into account you might like some of the tools you have, and it allows us to put what we do the best at the core of their problem solving, and that's identity resolution, which is a big problem. Again, we talked briefly about these financial institutions have many point solutions. Some are buying more solutions now than they are building, and the idea that I can exist in all of them with or without a social security number or a deterministic key, you really need to figure out who I am. And our approach is to put our identity resolution, our identity solution at the forefront of solving the customer problems, and then let them adjust and configure the rest of the platform. So it's a solution, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed because of the amount of data that we consume, and we feel as though we've built the right framework to help companies of any size solve it.
Well, it's interesting too. One thing that I keep on emphasizing is speed of action, speed of making decisions, speed of partnerships is more important than ever. And I often will say the fact that an organization today needs partners. They need partners to build a customer data platform. They need partners to build a better communications process. And that organizations such as the 2 years really bring this solution. But if nothing else, you've got to do something. That the delay of trying to make that perfect decision as to which partner to use is as damaging as delaying what communication process to use or what data sets to use. And overall, more than ever, the good news about a partnership such as Imperity and Persato is that your organizations already work with financial institutions. You've already gone down this path. I mean, how much better is it to work with somebody that already knows some of the challenges you're going to have going forward, as opposed to trying to figure this out yourself? The biggest banks in the world, I was talking to Chase and Wells Fargo and a lot of the other big banks over the last, and American Express over the last couple of weeks, every one of these are using partners to help build better solutions, because these specialists out there really can build the solutions quicker, easier, and avoid those detours that can really distract success. And when you look at this, and when you look at the power of big tech players and fintech organizations, we can't afford to wait. We've got to deploy solutions as quickly as possible. So, Christian, from your perspective, and ending our conversation before we go to questions, what is the one thing that you'd really recommend financial institutions do today to make their success in 2022 greater as it relates to customer data platforms, or just in the broad sense of handling customer data and communications?
Wow. I think their first action should be to chart out a path to how to increase the customer's experience across the organization, whether again it's within in the retail bank store, or whether it's online or whatever it is. Chart out that path of how I can increase and enhance that experience, and then figure out the underlying data points that are going to drive that, because that's going to get us back to what we talked about a few times, right? How do I find small projects? Well, here's my chart, here's my map for 2022. I now know the data that supports some of these decisions, some of these things I need to do, and I'm going to focus on these these two, and I'm going to just go ahead and do it. But you can't, you have to start with the plan. You can't, again, with the amount of point solutions and the amount of data that we're looking at, talking about here, you can't just say, well, I'll take all the data and then I'll figure it out. Because to your point, you need to act smart and quickly. And I think that's the approach to do it in 2022.
And Christian, Amperity can help an organization build this plan, build this what I'll call even a mini plan to move forward, can't you? I mean, this is not new to you. I think that's the other thing. We can get buried in the details of things that we don't know, or we can pick partners that say, help me build this, and then determine how you go forward from there. Vipul, from your standpoint, what would you suggest organizations do today to see an impact in the first quarter of 2022?
Well, if to echo on what Christian said, I think you start with what is your organizational goals, and that should be something you're already doing, inherent in your business. So if one of the focus areas is to reduce churn, or mitigate, deal with retention issues, or drive gross acquisitions, then that's where you need to latch into. And a solution like Persato can help address existing organizational goals. We're almost an insurance policy in a way, to make sure that the programs that you have in place that focus on those areas that are important to the business have a bit more juice or thrust behind them. And so the first step is just go, where does the organization need to put more energy? And that is a natural place for a technology like Persato to play a role.
Great. Lee, I'm sure we have some questions. Can you feed us some questions as to what the audience is wanting to learn more about?
Absolutely, Jim. We do. Our first one that came in, or just came in, can you elaborate on how Amperity works with an existing tech stack?
Yeah, it certainly can. So we do it in twofold, right? Go back to Jim's point about partners. We have partners, right? Partners that help us, that we have connectors with, so that we can do data exchange. And I think the other thing too is around our approach to data ingestion, right? So again, having coming from the financial institution, I know the challenge it is to get data to meet a certain spec, to fit a certain schema. Our approach is, give me what you have, right? Do a select star. I often say, do a select star from the customer table, put it in a file in an SFTP site, and we'll start there, right? Very simple, no transformations. And so when we talk about how we support it, it's really in the design of the platform to take some of the onus around data transformations and data mapping, and take that off of the financial institution's plate, put it on ours, because we actually have the tools in the platform to do it, so that we can get that time to value as short as possible.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to send it right back to you. What are your recommendations for actions or steps for those of us just getting started on a digital transformation?
Yeah, again, having been in some of your all seats and trying to, I built a CDP without a vendor, and I know the rock that I had to push to make that happen, right? So I would educate yourself and start to socialize the idea that, hey, this is how we transform in 2022 and beyond, right? This is how we retain customers. Because again, I think a lot of institutions are okay with the idea that customers are leaving to go from one bank to the next. Now we have to start competing with new providers that are digital only and have a less of friction, if you will, to competing in the space, right? So you have to socialize this plan that in order to compete in the 2022 economy with the fintechs and the online banks, you need to have the right tools in your arsenal. and a CDP is that tool to help you understand customer behavior, so you can, I think you used the term earlier, to pivot and respond as time requires.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian. Vipul, there is a concern that AI will replace content jobs. What does a partnership between AI and human creators look like?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't think so, because the AI can optimize, but really can't determine intent. You have to have someone who originally kind of says, here's what I'm trying to invoke or convey, and that's a starting point. And the AI can, help you understand a how, but it cannot articulate a why. And so, at least for the foreseeable, imaginable future, that's unlikely to happen.
Great. And Christian, digital transformation is a broad topic and a big lift. What is the timeline associated with a project of this size?
Yeah, it's another good question, and hopefully you're okay with the answer, right? There is no defined timeline, right? Because the idea is that you need to get started, and it will perpetuate itself, just like any of the other banking systems that are in place. The idea that data is going to change day by day, year by year. Something will affect the CDP that's built, something that will be bought, that will be ingested, that data changes, right? Data is not persistent, it will change. So the idea that a timeline is something I could say, oh, it's a 12-month project. Well, we've seen some of our retailers get off the ground in 10 weeks and provide value. Certainly that's a little bit of the exception to the norm, but the reality is, 3 months, 6 months, you'll start seeing value if you have the right small project. But then the reality is that could go to 18 to 24 to 36 months, because not only are you now building more and more small projects, but now you're increasing your data. You have other lines of business that are migrating platforms that offer more data services. So you want to make sure you include those as well. So it's an evolving thing that will span beyond whatever first implementation that you have scheduled.
This is interesting because you brought it up, and I think organizations want to think that digital transformation or marketing transformation or digital communication, there's an endpoint that basically you're working towards this goal. The reality is it's a process. Does not have an endpoint. So you can't say I'm 35% done on something when the endpoint keeps on moving. That's what's interesting about the digital world more than the analog world, is you're not trying to put this nice package together, because as you said, Christian, to do this well, it continues to evolve. The way you bring new data in, the way you get rid of certain data. You have government regulations and consumer issues that you have to continually deal with in much the same way that I'm sure that Persato deals with the way you communicate with consumers. So we'd love to think there's a plug and play, but it's not that easy. Now it should not deter people from doing it, but I think it's got to put in perspective. As you said, the project, it depends on how you build it. You may say, you know what, I have to deal with I have a major problem with brand new customers that are trying to open an account digitally. I need to look at this whole data set and figure out how to solve that on both a data side as well as communication side. That project is going to be a lot smaller than I want to look at my entire deposit and loan base and build a good customer data platform. Now, you don't want to have these things be individual units that don't talk to each other, but still you can get some early wins.
Great, and I think this will be our last question unless anyone chimes in the next couple minutes. Vipul, is it possible for organizations to meet the demand of the market for personalized content and experiences without AI?
Yes, but you need a lot of brute force. So is it economical to meet that demand without AI? No. Just because the average person can't hold that much data and set of experiences to render something that's really competitive with AI. And you can see this, the previous question around copywriting that come up, what I'd say is that even if I were to write something, I'm going to write it based on a collection of experiences I myself have had. and that universe of experiences is inherently limited. Versus the AI can kind of accommodate for what is the universe of experiences different people, different types of people have had. And so the language that that AI often comes up with is so different than maybe what I would have come up with, because again, my intuition, my creativity is a function of my limited set of experiences as a person. And so that is why AI, is really the way to go. Trying to brute force this is going to be too difficult.
Great, and that was our last question, so I'm just gonna swing it back to you guys to see if you have any closing remarks for everyone.
Well, I want to thank the two gentlemen on the webinar today. I think as a takeaway, organizations have to realize that the risk of hesitation is much greater than the risk of moving forward, and that the importance of moving forward at speed with partners that have already gone down this path before and can bring you success stories and examples and case studies that you can implement cannot be overstated. Now more than ever, the consumer's looking for organizations that are going to be their partners on their financial journey. They're going to be looking for, as I mentioned earlier, organizations that will know them, understand them, and reward them for their business. If we do not move forward with better customer data platforms, better communication methods, we will lose that customer. We may not lose the account. We may look and say our attrition rate is still very low. We may still make profitability, but we're going to lose the relationship. We're going to lose the trust, and we'll lose the loyalty of customers that have been with us for years or customers that are new to the organization. Gentlemen, I don't know if you have anything else to say, but I just want to thank you for being on the webinar today. You provided just a wealth of information, and I certainly really recommend that people that are on the call today reach out to both of you just to find out more about what you talked about today. We just scratched the surface.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
Alrighty, well, thank you, Christian and Vipul and Jim, and of course, Amperity for this informative webinar today. And to everyone who joined us, you can expect to receive an email shortly with an on-demand link to the webinar. Please feel free to share that with your team. Thanks for listening and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.